He thought it was just a simple act of kindness. But what happened days later left the entire town speechless. Elias Reed shuffled through the early morning haze, his hands stuffed deep in his coat pockets, his breath misting before him like a faded hope. The bakery bell above him jingled out of habit, but there was nothing left to buy, only the memory of warm loaves, butter, and a town that used to believe tomorrow would be brighter. The town of Willowby was gripped by hard times. Factories had closed, jobs had vanished, and many families like Elias's now counted every crumb. His pantry shelves were empty, save for a single crust of bread and a can of beans. His last meal, he decided, before hunger became just another name for despair. That morning, as he sat on his cold front steps to eat in silence, a stranger came down the dusty lane. He was thin and ragged, with a tired hat pulled low and eyes that held stories no one wanted to hear. Elias had never seen him before. Maybe nobody had. The man stopped, shoulders hunched against the world. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but do you have anything to eat?" Elias looked at his own meager meal, then at the stranger's hollow cheeks. It would have been easy to say no, easier still to turn away. But something in the man's voice, a worn-out hope, maybe, made Elias break his bread in two. He offered half to the stranger. The man's hands shook as he accepted it. "Thank you," he said, and a tear shone in the corner of his eye. Elias shrugged. "It's not much. It's everything," the stranger replied, and ate in grateful silence. When the meal was done, the stranger stood, dusted crumbs from his lap, and looked at Elias with deep, earnest eyes. "You'll see kindness returned," he said quietly, "sooner than you think." Then, as suddenly as he'd come, the stranger walked away, leaving Elias with an empty stomach and a strange sense of peace. That night, hunger gnawed at Elias, but regret did not. He drank hot water for supper and slept wrapped in a patchwork quilt, shivering against the cold. The next morning dawned gray and silent. Elias expected only more hardship, a long walk to the job boards, another day of closed doors. But as he stepped onto his porch, he found something he hadn't seen in weeks. A fresh loaf of bread, still warm, wrapped in a linen cloth. He looked up and down the empty street but saw no one. He knocked on his neighbor's door. Old Mrs. Bennet shook her head. "Not me, dear. But you can thank whoever left it by sharing a slice." Elias smiled and did just that. He split the loaf 3 ways, one for Mrs. Bennet, one for a child on the corner whose shoes were too small, and one for himself. Word spread. By noon, 3 more families found bread on their doorsteps. That evening, a crate of potatoes appeared by the town church. The next day, there were baskets of apples in the schoolyard. Each offering was anonymous, each one feeding someone who needed it most. People wondered aloud, who could be behind these miracles? Was it the mayor? The grocer? The church? Nobody claimed credit. Elias alone remembered the stranger's promise and wondered if, just maybe, the act of giving could ripple wider than he'd ever believed. As the week went on, Willowby seemed to wake from its long sleep of sadness. Neighbors greeted each other again. People began to share what little they had: tools, blankets, firewood, laughter. At the market, folks offered what they could spare, and no one went home empty-handed. The children, ever curious, began to hunt for the bread's source. They left thank-you notes tied to lampposts and watched the streets after dark, hoping to catch the bread angel in the act. But no one ever saw a thing. One cold evening, as Elias walked home from another fruitless job search, he saw something strange. His doorstep was crowded with gifts: flour, beans, even a jar of jam. Tucked beneath the bread, a note in neat handwriting: "One kindness given is 100 received. Keep believing. A friend." Elias pressed the note to his heart. He didn't know if the stranger was real, a dream, or something more. But for the first time in many months, hope flickered inside him. And so it went. As kindness spread, hunger and fear receded. The town, once shrouded in gloom, began to shine with a light that no one could name, but everyone could feel. Despite the spreading warmth in Willowby, no one could forget the stranger. Children turned his story into a game, searching for clues: a footprint in the mud, a scrap of cloth, the echo of boots on frost. Adults argued in whispers: was it magic or a good-hearted soul? Late one evening, Elias found himself wandering the old footbridge outside town, unable to sleep. The moon's pale light glittered on the river. He remembered the stranger's promise: "You'll see kindness returned, sooner than you think." Suddenly, a quiet cough broke the night. From beneath the bridge, the stranger emerged, shoulders hunched, hat pulled low. He looked thinner now, but his eyes were the same, a deep, infinite blue. "Why did you come back?" Elias asked, heart pounding. The stranger smiled, tired but kind. "To see what you did with what you were given." Elias wanted to thank him, to ask him how, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, the stranger said, "Sometimes, a little hope is all a place needs." Before Elias could reply, the stranger vanished into the darkness, footsteps swallowed by the hush of the sleeping town. Inspired by the stranger's words and the miracles in their midst, the people of Willowby decided to celebrate. They planned a festival, something the town hadn't seen in years. Tables were set up in the square, every family bringing what little they could: pies, vegetables, music, and laughter. Elias, for the first time in months, felt something lift from his chest. He joined the children in hanging lanterns from the trees and watched as even the weariest faces bloomed with smiles. At sunset, as the tables filled and stories flowed, a hush fell over the crowd. Mayor Corwin stood and raised his glass. "We've all received unexpected gifts this month," he said, "but the greatest gift is each other. Let's remember, kindness is a circle. What we give, we will always get back." The crowd cheered, candles flickered, and music rose into the night. And as Elias looked out over the gathered families, he saw the stranger at the edge of the light, smiling. Just for a moment, before slipping away once more. After the festival, Willowby was not the same. People found new strength in unity. Small businesses reopened, and the school started a program to help families in need. Children played games called the Kindness Hunt, delivering food baskets to anyone who needed them. Elias's own life changed too. He found work at the bakery, helping to bake the same bread that had fed him during his hardest days. Each loaf, he told the owner, was more than flour and water. It was hope, shaped by many hands. Still, whenever he saw someone struggling, Elias remembered what it felt like to be hungry, lost, and then found. He kept a loaf of bread on hand at all times, ready for the next stranger in need. And though the stranger was never seen in town again, his presence lingered. In every act of kindness, every open door, every full table. Willowby's story spread beyond its borders. Newspapers wrote about the miracle of kindness, and people from neighboring towns came to see for themselves. But for those who had been there, the greatest miracle was simple. A little hope given freely could make the impossible happen. Spring arrived in Willowby with the scent of blooming apple trees and a new energy on every street. The memories of winter hunger faded, replaced by laughter and the promise of long, bright days. Yet in the hearts of many, especially Elias, a quiet hope lingered. Would the stranger ever return? Or was he just a fleeting miracle? A lesson the town was meant to learn. One evening, just as the sun set in ribbons of gold, a commotion stirred near the square. A horse-drawn wagon rattled into town, and from its seat stepped a man in a faded hat, shoulders straight, eyes brighter than anyone remembered. The children recognized him first. "It's him, the bread man," they cheered, racing to tell their families. Elias stood on his porch, heart racing as the stranger approached. The man smiled, extending a rough hand. "I told you kindness would find its way back." With him, the stranger brought supplies, tools, seeds, even books for the school. He'd been to other towns, he explained, where he'd shared Willowby's story and gathered gifts in return. "But this isn't about me," he said, as the crowd gathered. "It's about you, all of you, and what you've become." The festival in Willowby glowed into the night, brighter than anything the town had seen in a generation. Every home seemed to empty into the square. Parents carrying sleeping toddlers, elderly couples arm in arm, teenagers stringing lanterns across the chestnut trees. The memory of hunger was far behind them, but its lesson remained in every gentle word and outstretched hand. The stranger, though overwhelmed by the attention, accepted the warmth of Willowby with humble gratitude. Children tugged at his sleeve to hear stories from far-off towns. The local pastor pressed a homemade pie into his hands, and even the gruff blacksmith, who rarely smiled, offered a handshake and a wordless nod of respect. After supper, the mayor called for quiet. Lanterns cast golden halos on eager faces. "Tonight," she said, "we honor not one man, but a chain of kindness." One act led to another, until hope outgrew hunger. Elias was invited to stand beside the stranger. He hesitated, but the man's reassuring smile gave him courage. As he faced his neighbors, Elias felt the weight of his journey. How one crust of bread, offered in desperation, had transformed his life and the entire town. The stranger produced a bundle wrapped in burlap and handed it to Elias. "You started this, friend," he said. "Open it." Elias untied the string. Inside was the kindness ledger, its leather soft with use. He turned the pages, astonished. There were dozens, now nearly 100 entries from all over the county. Thanks for meals, notes of hope, sketches by children, even poems. Each signature was a story. A neighbor, a visitor, a drifter, all touched by Willowby's gift. Moved to tears, Elias read aloud a passage written by a woman from the next town. "We thought kindness was lost. Then Willowby proved it only needed a spark." People listened in reverent silence. Around them, the festival pulsed with life. Music, games, stories, and laughter. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the power of a single generous act. Later that night, as the festival faded into soft singing and starlight, the stranger sat beside Elias at the edge of the square. "You changed more than you know," he said. "A circle never really ends, and kindness has a way of finding its way home, again and again." The stranger departed Willowby with the dawn, slipping away as quietly as he had first arrived. Yet his presence lingered, a comforting shadow in the corners of every home, every bakery, every hopeful heart. It wasn't just his story that remained, but the hundreds now written into the kindness ledger. Elias watched the sunrise that morning, the ledger in his lap. He thought about the hunger he had known, the loneliness that nearly broke him, and the simple miracle of being seen and answered. It gave him strength, a kind of joy he never expected to feel again. In the months that followed, Willowby blossomed. Word of the town's kindness spread even farther. Strangers arrived seeking help and left with new hope. Some stayed and built new lives, starting businesses, planting gardens, raising children. Elias, now a pillar of the community, spent his days at the bakery, teaching apprentices the secrets of bread and the even greater secret of generosity. Every spring, on the anniversary of the festival, the townsfolk gathered in the square, reading new entries from the ledger, sharing stories, remembering the stranger who brought a miracle to their door. Children grew up hearing the tale, how hunger turned to plenty, how a single meal became a feast, and how giving away your last hope could return 100-fold. New games arose, kindness scavenger hunts, secret gift exchanges, random acts of service. Elias would often pause by the old footbridge, remembering that first encounter. He wondered where the stranger had gone, what towns he'd helped, whose lives he'd changed. He hoped the man knew how deeply he'd been loved. Sometimes travelers arrived in Willowby carrying their own stories. One woman, holding her baby close, told of a bread man who had visited her village, leaving enough for all to share. Another elderly man arrived, saying he'd once been lost and hungry until a stranger with kind eyes fed him on a snowy night. The circle grew ever wider, and though the world outside sometimes seemed cruel, Willowby remained a beacon, a living miracle of hope, memory, and the endless power of a single act of kindness.